So he has stepped up right now. Let's go to Bob Carr.
Syrian diplomatic representatives. It includes the United Kingdom, Germany, France, Spain, Italy, Canada and the United States. This represents concerted global action by some of the world's largest powers to make clear their revulsion at the recent massacre. It's also reinforcing the message being taken to the Assad regime by Joint Special Envoy Kofi Annan. We're continuing to work through our permanent representative to the UN on a unified international response, and that will include several measures. One is referral to the International Criminal Court of the Hula massacre. Another proposition is a UN arms embargo, and a third, UN agreement on financial and travel restrictions on members of the Syrian regime and organisations. Australia's already committed $11 million for emergency food and medical aid to assist Syrians caught in the current conflict. And that money will flow to the refugee camps where Syrians driven out of their own country are living in conditions of great distress. The aid is being distributed via organisations like the World Food Programme, the Red Cross and the UN. Later today, as it happens, I'll be meeting with the head of the World Food Programme, Ms. Cousin, here in Canberra, to discuss what further measures might be required in humanitarian aid. I can, this is unrelated to Syria, announce an additional 25 million contribution to emergency food relief in the Sahel, South Sudan and Pakistan. And this is going to help with those crippling humanitarian crises caused by famine, drought and local conflicts. I'll be discussing the distribution of this aid with the head of the World Food Programme, Ms. Cousin, later today. 10 million of that goes to the escalating food crisis in the Sahel, where around 18 million people are affected by drought and food shortages. Another 5 million will assist the people in South Sudan. We can do this because, notwithstanding the pressures of the recent budget to deliver a surplus, Australia runs one of the most generous aid programs in the world. We're one of very few countries to increase aid in the current financial climate. I might pause for your questions.
Does Australia support the French call for consideration for military action?
Look, we'll talk about it, but you would need unanimity in the Security Council for that to take place. And you've got to take account of the criticisms that China and Russia, as is their right, have made of the way intervention was managed in Libya. The other consideration is the sheer logistical difficulty of arming a divided opposition in Syria and of projecting force into a country, even trying to establish no-fly zones on the Libyan model, where Syria has very considerable ground-to-air missile defences. In fact, it's been suggested to me they have thousands of missiles. They have an army hugely more powerful than that of Libya, and they have a very rough, variegated terrain, again a difference between them and Libya. Unity in the Syrian opposition is of course a major consideration here. To arm the Syrian opposition involves real difficulties. Members of the Assad government would interpret this as a licence to slaughter even more vigorously than they've been doing their political opponents. A no-fly zone, difficult to enforce, given Syria's military strength in the air and with ground-to-air defences. Other approaches to intervention carry high risk. It would need to be discussed very thoroughly.
So because Syria is stronger militarily than Libya, you're saying that really is a reason why we shouldn't launch military action?
I'm not ruling out discussions on the subject. I just think in a spirit of candour I ought to share with you the reservations that are going to be expressed. It's got to be noted too that America, which was very reluctant to commit forces in Libya and opted to rely very largely on NATO delivering the intervention, is not of a mind, least of all in a presidential election year, to engage in a third war. And all the indications are that a military intervention in Syria would involve a very big commitment of resources. America is eager to manage a transition in Afghanistan. It's aware of the cost of the Iraq war.
There does seem to be a risk that there'd be a view that a moral difference, if you like, that we're saying some people's suffering is easily fixed, and because it's hard to fix other people's suffering, that we just won't do it.
I'm not arguing there aren't contradictions.
Senator Carr, have you been advised that there's any information about who carried out this latest massacre? That regular troops?
Yeah, I'm not aware. No, I'm not aware of any refinement in the investigation.
And the other thing, the Assad government's insisting that the rebels are in the main sort of Al-Qaeda-linked Islamic extremists. Do you have any views on whether that's true? Or
Well, we're not endorsing the rebels. I'm highlighting the fact that there is obviously division among the opposition forces. Some on the ground in Syria are apparently not accepting the leadership of the Syrian National Council. I wouldn't go beyond that, except to say, whatever the nature of the opposition, there exists a case for the two things we want most. That is a ceasefire, as sought by Kofi Annan, and a political dialogue between the government in Damascus and the opposition it faces, rather than slaughter, rather than continued conflict. A ceasefire and a political dialogue, a political settlement, are the things we want most.
Would Australia consider shutting down the Syrian embassy entirely?
I don't think that would convey a message any stronger than the one we've already conveyed, and there may in fact be advantages in having some presence here, but fundamentally, if there's a message to be delivered by doing something with diplomatic representation, that message has been delivered.
What sanctions are currently in force against Syria, and are you prepared to beef up those sanctions?
The sanctions we've got in place now are on bans. Our bans apply, our sanctions apply to members associated with the Syrian government. We've named those people in our sanctions, having visas to travel to Australia, and having any financial transactions, financial dealings with Australian institutions.
Are you prepared to put further sanctions against the Syrian government?
Yes, we would, but I don't want to talk that up because our trade with Syria is so modest. But the UN, the UK and the US sanctions are hurting Syria. Its GDP has contracted, there's no tourism, and tourism accounted for 12% of their economy, and they're having to ration energy.
What's your reaction to events in Papua New Guinea, Minister? Do you have any idea who's in charge?
The events yesterday were most certainly confusing, and we'll observe closely through our very alert, very diligent High Commission in Port Moresby what happens today. I think the significant thing out of what happened in PNG yesterday is the country continues to be on course for a democratic election. And what a source of pride it should be to all citizens of Papua New Guinea that their country, poor as it is, ethnically diverse as it is, topographically challenging as it is, adheres to democratic norms. I think it's a matter of distinction and of great pride for the citizens of PNG that their country stays on a democratic path, despite all the temptations to do otherwise. I've got to return to Senate estimates. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so that was the Foreign Affairs Minister Bob Carr live from Canberra talking about the possible further action against the Syrian government. He mentioned referral to the International Criminal Court over that Hula massacre, a UN arms embargo and further financial and travel restrictions. He was very much talking down the possibility of military action.